The sword and stars troubled even the Targaryens, Jaina Lannister to Jaime Lannister, on the Faith Militant, A Feast for Crows Chapter 33, Jaime 5. In the year 41 AC, King Aenys Targaryen had arguably the biggest error in his reign, with the marriage of his two eldest children, Princess Rhaena and his heir, Prince Aegon. The king had grossly misjudged the temperament of the kingdom, the piety of his people, and the power of the High Septon's words alone. The incestuous marriage was condemned far more harshly than Aenys had thought possible, given his own parents' marriage, which the faith and the realm had accepted. Rhaena and Aegon had set out on their first solo royal progress, but from the first day they set out, the newlyweds and their escort were jeered by crowds of the faithful wherever they went. At Maidenpool, not a single Septon could be found who was willing to pronounce a blessing at the feast Lord Mootton had thrown in their honour. When they eventually reached Harrenhal, Lord Lucas Harroway refused to admit them into his castle unless they agreed to acknowledge his daughter, Alice, as their Uncle Maegor's true and lawful wife. Their refusal won them no love from the pious, only a cold, wet night in tents beneath the looming, towering walls of Black Harren's mighty castle. At one small village in the Riverlands, several poor fellows, the armed smallfolk of the faith, went so far as to pelt the royal couple with dirt. Prince Aegon, perhaps without forethought, the kind needed by a prince, drew his sword on them to chastise them and had to be restrained by his own knights and retainers. For the prince's party was greatly outnumbered, and it was a fight they could not win. Yet that did not stop the bold Princess Rhaena from riding up to them to say, "You are fearless when facing a girl on a horse. I see. The next time I come, I will be on a dragon. Throw dirt on me then, I pray you." This warning seemed to take the fight out of the poor fellows on this occasion. Filthy, unshaven creatures, armed with spears and axes and clad in bits of dented plate, rusted mail and cracked leather, under rough-spun surcoats bleached white and blazoned with the seven-pointed star of the faith, the High Sparrow's ragged army. Cersei Lannister's thoughts on the reborn poor fellows. A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 65. Cersei 2. But things were no better elsewhere in the realm. In fact, one could say matters went from bad to worse to awful. Septa Mermerson, the king's new hand, meant to build bridges between the crown and the faith, but he was exiled from the faith in punishment for performing the forbidden wedding between Aegon and Rhaena. King Aenys himself took quill in hand to write directly to the High Septon, asking that His High Holiness restore my good Mermerson, and explaining the long history of brother and sister marriages in old Valyria. The High Septon's reply was so venomous and brutal that Aenys went pale when he read it. It is true that whispers began to circulate that no High Septon would ever have dared speak to his father Aegon the Conqueror that way. Far from relenting, however, the shepherd of the faithful addressed Aenys as King Abomination, declaring him a pretender and a tyrant with no right to rule the Seven Kingdoms, and the faithful were all so readily willing to listen. Less than 2 weeks later, as Septa Mermerson was crossing King's Landing in a litter, a group of poor fellows came swarming from an alley and hacked him to pieces brutally with their blunt axes. The warriors' sons, the militant arm of the faith, began to fortify the Hill of Rhaenys, turning the Sept of Remembrance into a defensive citadel. It would not be easy to recapture it without huge loss of life. With the Red Keep still years away from completion, Aenys decided that his manse on top of Visenya's Hill was too vulnerable and made plans to remove himself to Dragonstone with his Queen Alyssa and their younger children. That proved a wise precaution, but some saw this as an admittance of defeat by the king, who was now running away from his own capital city, when in theory, if he had mounted his dragon Quicksilver, he could put an end to this uprising in an afternoon. 3 days before they were set to sail, two poor fellows somehow managed to scale the Aenys' manse's wall and broke into his bedchamber. Only the swift and timely intervention of the Kingsguard saved Aenys from an ignoble death, but strengthened his resolve to relocate to the safety of Dragonstone. Holy men, ascetic, fanatics, sorcerers, dragon slayers, demon hunters. There were many tales about them, implacable in their hatred for all enemies of the holy faith. Cersei Lannister to Tywin the Merryweather on the Warrior's Sons. A Feast for Crows chapter 28, Cersei 6. A joke among the faithful was that Aenys was trading Visenya's Hill for Visenya herself. On Dragonstone, the Dowager Queen famously greeted him mockingly. "You're a fool and a weakling nephew. Do you think any man would have ever have dared speak so to your father? You have a dragon. Use him. Fly to Oldtown and make this Starry Sept another Harrenhal, or give me leave and let me roast this pious fool for you." But Aenys would not hear of it. Instead, he sent the Dowager Queen to her chambers in the Sea Dragon Tower and ordered her to remain there. By the end of 41 AC, much of the realm was deep in the throes of a full-fledged rebellion against House Targaryen. The 4 false kings who had arisen on the death of Aegon the Conqueror now seemed like so many posturing fools against the threat posed by this new uprising of the faith. For these rebels believed themselves soldiers of the faith of the Seven, fighting a holy war against godless tyranny. Dozens of pious lords throughout the Seven Kingdoms took up the cry, pulling down the king's banner and declaring for the Starry Sept. The warriors' sons seized the gates of King's Landing, giving them control over who might enter and leave the city, and drove the workmen from the unfinished Red Keep. Thousands of poor fellows took to the roads, forcing travellers to declare whether they stood with the gods or the Abomination, and demonstrating outside castle gates until the lords came forth to denounce the Targaryen king. In the Westerlands, Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaena were forced to abandon their progress and take shelter in Cratecool Castle. An envoy from the Iron Bank of Braavos was sent to Oldtown to treat with Martin Hightower, the new lord of the Hightower and voice of Oldtown. He wrote home, back to the bank, to say the High Septon was the true king of Westeros in all but name. The Iron Bank viewed the High Septon as the effective king, not Aenys. Not just Aenys, but House Targaryen as rulers had lost all legitimacy, given how vital the finances of the bank were to the running of the Seven Kingdoms. As weeks turned to months, the unrest showed no signs of stopping, without hard intervention from the crown, meaning one thing: dragons. But this was clearly not something Aenys was willing to do. The coming of the new year of 42 AC found King Aenys still on Dragonstone, growing ever sicker with fear and indecision. At the best of times, Aenys found making choices of his own volition a difficult thing to do, even more so now under the pressures of his realm being in complete uprising. The legacy of his father, crumbling in a single generation, just brought all these issues more to the forefront for Aenys. King Aenys was only 35 years of age, a young man, as highborn men go. But it was said that he looked like a man of 60, and Grand Maester Garwin reported he often took to his bed with loose bowels and stomach cramps. When none of the Grand Maester's cures proved effective, the Dowager Queen Visenya took charge of the king's care, and King Aenys did seem to improve for a time. Some believed that while Aenys' recovery would be slow, he may be restored to his old self, but that all changed very rapidly. King Aenys suffered a sudden collapse when word reached him that thousands of poor fellows had surrounded Cratecool, where his son and daughter were reluctantly guests. We are not sure exactly what happened, but the king never recovered from the shock, and 3 days later, the king, Aenys Targaryen, the eldest son of Aegon the Conqueror and his beloved wife, Queen Rhaenys, died at the age of 35. Like his father, Aenys, the first of his name, was given over to the flames in the yard at Dragonstone. His funeral was attended by his sons, Viserys and Jaehaerys, 12 and 7 years of age respectively, and his daughter, Alysanne, 5. His widow, Queen Alyssa, sang a sad song for him, and his own beloved Quicksilver set his pyre alight. Though it was recorded that the dragons Vermithor and Silverwing, the dragons of his children, added their own fires to hers. To the surprise and suspicion of many given her role in the king's final days, Dowager Queen Visenya was not present. Within less than an hour of the king's death, she had mounted her dragon Vhagar and flown east across the narrow sea. When she returned, she was followed by huge black wings that blocked out the sun and turned the castle yard dark as night. The Black Dread, Balerion, had returned, with Prince Maegor Targaryen, who would bring fire and blood to this faith uprising.